All right, hello everyone. Today's topic is the tundra. We are just about finished with our biomes unit. Today we're going to learn about the tundra. Tomorrow we'll talk about grassland and savanna. And then on Friday we'll take our exam. So, the tundra is the frozen desert. Yesterday we talked about the desert, remembering that the desert is dry and has very little precipitation and has lots of extreme temperatures. Well, a tundra is basically the same thing, except that it's frozen and covered with ice. So the word tundra actually comes from a Finnish word, Finnish as in Finland. And, usually we talk about roots being Latin or Greek, but this one is from Finland. And the word means treeless plain or treeless hill. So tundra comes from this word that means treeless or no trees. So a tundra is a land of no trees. And the most important thing about the tundra is it is the coldest biome on Earth. So this is the biome you're going to find at the North Pole, around the Arctic, and also at the tops of mountains, at the top of Mount Everest, even at the top of Pikes Peak here in Colorado. So here are some traits of the tundra, some things that all tundras have in common. First of all, they're very dry. So when you think of tundra, you should be thinking frozen desert. Now, this might be confusing because as you can see in these images, the tundra is covered with ice and snow. But because of the extreme temperatures, a lot of this ice and snow is just staying frozen and not actually going into the ground or turning into water where animals can use it. The other reason why we call the tundra the frozen desert, even though it's covered with technically water because ice and snow are water, is because it doesn't have very much precipitation. So even though there's ice and snow all over the ground, there's not much rain or snow or any precipitation falling from the sky throughout the year. So that is why we can classify the tundra as a frozen desert. Not because there's no water anywhere, but because there's not much precipitation. So they get, just like the desert, on average, less than 10 inches or about less than 20 inches in the tundra. Sometimes the tundra can get, 14, 15, 16 inches. So we'll say the tundra gets less than 20 inches of rain or snow every year. Tundras are also known for their long, cold winters and very short growing seasons. So you could also think short summers. Long, cold winters and short summers in the tundra. And there are very few trees. In fact, in most tundras, we would say there are no trees. Every now and then you might see one small tree, but practically no trees in the tundra. And it's a very difficult place to survive. So similar to the desert, any animals who live in the tundra or plants who live in the tundra have to be well adapted to live here. This is a very hard place to live. So we will talk a little bit about different types of adaptations or physical changes that animals and plants have made to be able to survive here. Why no trees in the tundra? Main reason why tundra is a treeless land is because of something called permafrost. There's a layer of permafrost in the soil. Let's break down that word permafrost. What is permafrost? So you see in this word that there's the beginning of the word perma, which might remind you of permanent, the word permanent, meaning forever or lasting a long time. And then you have the word frost, like frozen or ice, right? So permafrost is basically permanent ice or ground that is permanently frozen. So this happens only in the tundra. This is one of the unique qualities of the tundra. In the tundra, there is a small layer of soil that plants can dig into. But underneath the soil, not even very deep underground, there's this thick layer of permafrost, which is basically frozen solid ground. And because of this permafrost, which lies just directly underneath the top layer of soil, that is the reason why big plants like trees cannot grow in the tundra, because roots can't get through the permafrost. They can't permeate the permafrost. So a root is going to hit that permafrost and then not be able to go any further or any deeper. Therefore, trees, which need long and big roots to be able to anchor themselves into the ground, trees can't possibly grow here because they can't take root in the soil. So the only plants that are able to survive in the tundra are plants with really small roots, really shallow root systems. So plants that are low to the ground, like grasses and little shrubs, little mosses, and sometimes wildflowers, those kind of plants can grow here because they only have small root systems. Large plants cannot get their roots past this layer of permafrost. So that's why there's no trees in the tundra. So it's the permafrost that makes the tundra a treeless land. Also, because there's very little precipitation, that's another reason why trees have a hard time surviving here. Remember, the main thing about a tundra is that it's very dry. Even though we see all the snow and ice, there's hardly any usable water and hardly any precipitation. It's a frozen desert. Not a frozen desert. Notice one S in a frozen desert, two S's in a frozen dessert. So the way I remember this is when you have a frozen dessert, you always want two helpings or seconds of ice cream. But when it comes to a frozen desert, I just want one, thank you. I don't need two of those. All right, so let's pause our video. We're on question number 1. Tell me, what makes the tundra similar to the desert? Why do we call tundra the frozen desert? Go ahead and pause your video and go fill out your Google form, question number 1. Again, if you would prefer to write the questions and answers down on a piece of paper, that's fine with me. Just as long as after the video's over, you do still go back and fill in that Google form for me so I can give you participation credit, okay? All right, awesome. So you could have told me for question number 1, what makes the tundra similar to the desert? First of all, it's very hard to survive there. Second of all, it's very dry. They get very little precipitation. And also they have extreme temperatures. So all of those things are similarities between tundra and desert. Fantastic. So there are 2 main types of tundra, which we're going to talk about today. We have the Alpine Tundra and the Arctic Tundra. Alpine and Arctic. Have you heard these words before? Let's break them down. Alpine Tundra is the type of tundra that we have here in Colorado. So alpine just means above tree line in the mountains. So at the tops of mountains. Obviously, trees do grow in the mountains, but there's a certain elevation, a certain point, right around 11,000 feet, where trees stop growing. And as you can see in this picture, at the tops of the mountains, we have mostly grasses, rocks, but not a tree in sight. So this is the Alpine Tundra. We're mostly going to see grasses and rocks in the Alpine Tundra rather than a whole field covered with snow and ice. So that's how you can tell the difference between Alpine and Arctic Tundra. The Arctic just has a lot more ice. So here's Alpine Tundra. Again, you can see lots of rocks, grasses, and a couple hikers walking this ridgeline at the top of the mountains. So Alpine Tundra can be found all over the world, always at the tops of mountains. And again, just like all tundras, it is very dry and there are no trees. So here are some animals that live in the Alpine Tundra. We have the pika, small, aggressive mouse. One interesting fact about the pika is that they will hoard bird brains and save them to eat for food. It's one of this small mammal's favorite food is bird brains. You got to be tough to survive in a place like the tundra. The pika is also the inspiration for Pikachu. Kind of looks like him, right? If he was yellow and had longer ears. So the pika is one of the creatures who's well adapted to the tundra. One of the ways that it's adapted is by eating bird brains. Here's another rodent which is adapted to the tundra. This is called a marmot. And marmots are funny. If you've ever been on top of Pikes Peak, then you've probably seen a marmot staring at you or wanting your snacks. Marmots live in the tundra, and they are well adapted. You can see that they have thick fur to keep themselves warm. They make their homes inside of these rocks and underground in burrows, and they are able to survive by eating small mammals and chewing on grasses. And then we also have mountain goats. And you can tell that they are able to survive in the tundra by grazing on these little grasses. And they also have the perfect footwear for the tundra. Their feet are well adapted to be able to walk on steep cliff sides and little tiny edges of rocks. So mountain goats. So there's just a quick taste of the type of creatures in the Alpine Tundra. They are mostly omnivores and herbivores, mostly creatures who are able to eat little grasses or other small insects and bugs, small creatures. Okay, so most of the plants that you're going to see in the Alpine Tundra, grasses, shrubs, mosses, and lichens. Lichen, you might know, you might have seen lichen or moss on a rock before. Lichen is that type of, it almost looks like scaly, greenish skin that you can peel off of a rock. So grasses, shrubs, mosses, and lichens are all the types of plants that we find in the Alpine Tundra. Not really trees, okay, no big or exotic plants, just small little ground cover. And also, obviously, rocks and some animals. Okay, so go ahead and pause your video. Let's go to question number 2. What kind of organisms live in the Alpine Tundra? Sweet. And you could have told me, you could have told me pika or marmot, mountain goat, or you could have also told me plants. Remember, organisms just means living things. So you could have also said mosses, shrubs, grasses, lichens. Those are all organisms of the Alpine Tundra as well. All right, and finally, let's talk about the Arctic Tundra. The word Arctic means the North Pole or around the north, right? So the Arctic Tundra is the land of ice and snow that's specifically on the north end of our planet, right around the North Pole. So what makes the Arctic Tundra so unique? The Arctic Tundra is around the North Pole, and it is extremely cold. It's always cold there. So that's one of the big differences between Arctic and Alpine Tundra, is that the Alpine Tundra gets very cold, but has slightly less extreme temperatures than the Arctic. So in the Alpine, it can get a little warmer and it can be a little bit more mild than the Arctic. Since the Arctic is all the way at the North Pole, it's always extremely cold. And they have very, very long winters, long dark winters lasting for most of the year, and then a very, very short and bright summer. So because of the position of the Arctic on the end of the Earth, when the Earth is tilted away from the sun, or when the North Pole is tilted away from the sun, that's when the Arctic is in its long dark winter. Then in the summer, the North Pole tilts toward the sun. So that means that in the Arctic, they experience something called the midnight sun, where during the summer, it's sunshine all day long, and the sun never really sets because the whole entire North Pole is tilted and faced towards the sun. So even though the summer doesn't last very long in the Arctic, it's kind of crazy because the sun is up all the time during their really, really short summer. So it's a land of midnight sun. Okay, so these are some traits of the Arctic. And just like the Alpine Tundra, the Arctic tundra is also very dry and has no trees. Okay, so when we say very dry, again, there's ice and snow everywhere, but very dry means that it does not get precipitation or very much precipitation during the year. And again, in the Arctic tundra, you are going to see, even though you see ice and snow everywhere, you are going to find some small plants similar to the Alpine tundra. You'll see grasses, some shrubs, mosses, lichens, rocks, and some animals. Okay, so same type of organisms in the Arctic as in the Alpine. So here are some animals that you might see in the Arctic tundra. Caribou, also known as reindeer. So of course, we know that Santa lives at the North Pole, so his reindeer or his caribou live up there in the tundra with him. They're well adapted to that harsh environment, thanks to their thick fur and their ability to graze on tiny, tiny grasses under the snow. And then you have polar bears, who obviously are adapted thanks to their thick white coat. In fact, a lot of the animals that we see in the Arctic tundra have white fur, at least in the wintertime, so that they can blend in or camouflage with their surroundings. Usually towards the summer, their fur will turn a little bit more brown, again, so that they can stay camouflaged with their surroundings, since the snow is melting and it's turning a little bit more brown in the summer. So you've got your polar bears. Polar bears also adapt to the tundra by hibernating through the winter. So many creatures will sleep through the coldest, hardest part of the winter and emerge in the springtime when it's starting to be a little bit warmer. And then you have an Arctic fox. Same thing, the Arctic fox has thick white fur and also hibernates through the coldest season. Arctic hare, you can almost hardly see the Arctic hare on here, thanks to its excellent camouflage. And remember, a hare is just another name for a rabbit, right? A different type of rabbit. So this is an Arctic rabbit. And then you have snowy owls, many different types of birds who make their home in the tundra. Even in the Alpine tundra, there's birds like eagles. But this snowy owl is obviously well adapted to the Arctic because of what? Yeah, because of its white feathers. Okay, so we're on our third and final question. Go ahead and pause your video and answer for me question number 3. How is the Arctic tundra different from the Alpine tundra? Tell me one big difference. Okay, so you could have told me that the Arctic tundra is only found in the North Pole, while the Alpine tundra is found all over the Earth. You could have told me the differences between the types of animals who live there, Or maybe you would have told me that the Arctic tundra is much colder than the Alpine tundra. Lots of differences, lots of similarities, but also a few differences between Alpine and Arctic tundra. Okay, so let's review really quickly. The tundra equals the frozen desert. Another way to say it is a treeless land. So one of the only biomes on Earth that doesn't have any trees. You would also say, I guess, that the ocean doesn't have trees, but almost every other biome does have some kind of tree. So the tundra is the biome with no trees. And there are two types of tundra: Alpine tundra at the tops of mountains and Arctic tundra at the North Pole. So Alpine looks a little bit more green usually, rocky and grasses. We even have Alpine tundra here in Colorado. Looks like this, right? Different types of grasses, different types of shrubs and bushes, no trees, okay, but big fields, and not very much wildlife here either, right? This is a hard place to survive. And then you have Arctic tundra, which is specific land around the North Pole. Ice and snow and glaciers that are just up north in the top of our Earth. So it looks more like this. There's sheets of ice and snow and rock and just a few little grasses you can see poking out of the soil or poking out of the snow. And, the animals who live there will be able to find those little tiny sprouts of plants in order to eat them and survive. So which one do you think is harder to survive in, the Alpine tundra or the Arctic tundra? It's a good question. All right, my friends, that's the end of our lesson for today. Just like with all the other biomes, there's obviously so much more that we could learn about the tundra, but hopefully you have a good idea of some basic traits of the tundra, what makes a tundra, and an understanding of the two different types of tundra that we have on Earth. So there is our basic introduction. Tomorrow we will learn about grassland and savanna, and then on Friday we'll take our biomes test. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being here today. You are ready to take your DOL. Good luck, and let me know if you have any questions. Talk to you later. Bye.